all the things that we talk about in law enforcement that we train our officers, when you're in one of those critical incidents, when you're in one of those life-threatening situations, or you're protecting somebody else whose life is being threatened, time does slow down. You don't hear things the same. You don't see things moving the same. And, auditory exclusion. I can tell you my shooting, I was shooting a shotgun. I don't remember it going off. I don't remember hearing it go off, but I know it did. I remember hearing the shots of the other officers that were involved.
Untreated trauma, dealing with police officers. So it's estimated that an officer during the first year of service will experience anywhere from 7 to 10 incidents, traumatic incidents. And then throughout the career, can you imagine day after day responding to calls for service, accidents, witnessing at times the worst humanity has to offer? How that impacts a person? Well, today we're going to speak with Assistant Chief Daniel Morgalo of the city of Miami Beach about police operations and what Miami Beach, as a cutting-edge agency, police agency, is doing to help officers when it comes to recognizing and addressing their untreated trauma, but also putting measures in place to help them provide you, the public, better police services. I am Robert Asencio, and today on Bets and Badges, again, we have the honor and privilege to speak with Daniel Morgalo.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate being here. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak about a very important topic and talk about how proud I am and grateful to be an assistant chief at the Miami Beach Police Department, and the things that we do for our officers specifically to make sure that not only are they physically safe, but they're mentally safe and able to go out and do the job and treat the community the way the community deserves to be treated.
Yeah, man, we often forget about that, right? And it is a service to the community. But Chief, you've been in police work for
30 years.
3 decades, right? Let's talk briefly, just a little bit about your background.
So I started out my career really 22 years old as a Florida Department of Corrections correctional officer. And what that experience taught me very quickly was how to speak to people, how to listen to people. And I knew at that point that I didn't want to have a career for 30 plus years in corrections. I wanted to do more. I wanted to be on the law enforcement police side. Began my police officer career with City of Sweetwater Police Department in 1995. And was there for 4.5 years, was able to become a canine handler there, went through City of Miami Canine School with my canine partner Taz, and loved every minute of being a canine handler. Best partner I ever had, never complained about the radio station or the car being too cold, was always happy to see me, and the only partner I ever let lick my face. That being said, as I continued through my career, I wanted opportunities to get into the investigative side. And at the time, Sweetwater really didn't have a lot of opportunities for advancement. And the opportunity presented itself to go to Miami Beach towards the end of 1999 in anticipation of the Millennium New Year and the Millennium Bug. So they hired several certified police officers at that time. And I came on literally 2 weeks before the end of 1999 and the end of the 90s. And I've had the opportunity to do a bunch of interesting and amazing things during the time that I've been with Miami Beach.
So you patrol investigations to include internal affairs, homicide, command staff level, incident commander, commanding of officers. Now you command the entire patrol division or operations, if you will. Let's talk about, you've had a lot of incidents on Miami Beach, right? It's a city. For many across the globe, it's a destination of choice and a desired one. But there has not been a shortage of controversial incidents that have occurred there where the officers have faced some critical incidents. Let's talk a little about you and what you've been involved in personally and how you've dealt with those traumatic situations.
So as a young officer with Sweetwater, I was involved in a police shooting. One of 3 individuals that was involved in that shooting. There was 2 county officers involved in the same incident. Um, Really, what that taught me in hindsight, because at the time things were very different than the way we handle them now. Um, in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, um, I was sitting in my police car with my dog, waiting for my PBA attorney to come to the scene. Remember vividly reading a magazine in my car by myself, and what really struck me was the isolation of it.
Yeah.
And I understand, for investigative purposes, why it gets done, but it was all I wanted to do was tell my story because I knew I had done my job the way I was trained to do my job, and I had done right. Um, and the process itself lends itself to you need to isolate yourself. You need to take some time to really sort out what happened. What you remember. There's studies that show that you have a tendency to remember more after you've had a sleep cycle,
Yeah.
and things like that. So we've learned from previous mistakes as a profession to put our officers in the best position possible, to be able to tell an accurate story. Moving forward from that, once I got to Miami Beach, eventually I became a homicide investigator, and I was able to see that perspective of responding to critical incidents, officer-involved shootings, mass casualty events. And that experience that I had as the subject officer, if you will, which I prefer to call them involved officers, helped me to better understand and empathize with what they may be feeling and the way they may perceive me as coming to the scene, and really looking at everything they did from a criminal investigative perspective.
So for excuse me, but for the people that are locally in South Florida, and I suspect that those that are not in South Florida can reflect on the news events and they'll see officer-involved shootings. But let's talk a little bit about, if you will, just give the audience an idea of what an officer goes through when they discharge their firearms at a subject. The emotional piece that goes through with it, so we can progress in the conversation.
So depending on the specific circumstances, obviously if the officer is, the direct person being threatened, that triggers the response, and that's what it always is. It's a response to somebody else's actions.
Yeah.
Obviously, if the officer's injured, from that situation, then it's different because you're dealing with the physical injury as well as the emotional injury. But for a long time, the profession looked at that as, suck it up and move on. It's part of the job, and you need to have your mind in the right place to be able to be the person that has to take that action, because we just can't throw our hands up and say, somebody call the police.
Yeah.
We're there. We have to solve that problem. So it's important that we get past that bravado of, hey, suck it up, stiff upper lip, get through it, and recognize that it's okay to feel certain things in the aftermath. It's okay to be emotional when you start to come down from the adrenaline high and realize how close you came, or one of your colleagues or an innocent person came to losing their life, and it resulted in you having to discharge your firearm at another human being. And just the totality of that process, because you have to survive on multiple levels. Yes, you need to survive physically. You need to live to fight another day, but you need to be able to survive a criminal investigation. You need to be able to survive an administrative investigation. Did you follow policy? Were you using the right ammunition? Were you, qualified with that firearm? You need to overcome all those hurdles, and most importantly, you need to be able to look at yourself in the mirror afterwards and know that you did your job the right way.
I appreciate you going into those details, because I want people to understand, those that are not in law enforcement, those that are not, serving, and those that have not been involved in these shootings, that it's not just like you see it on TV.
Right.
Done, go home, come back, and then work again. There's a whole bunch of, I guess, events and factors that follow an incident where there's an involved shooting. On the emotional side, right? You just mentioned, you go from that high, that adrenaline high, to, you start crashing, if you will. And then that's when you start doubting, or you start thinking, second guessing yourself. And even if you don't second guess yourself, you're still, going down that checklist. How much does that weigh on you?
It can weigh on you. Every situation obviously is different based on the circumstances. But all the things that we talk about in law enforcement that we train our officers, when you're in one of those critical incidents, when you're in one of those life-threatening situations, or you're protecting somebody else whose life is being threatened, you time does slow down. You don't hear things the same. You don't see things moving the same, and auditory exclusion. I can tell you, my shooting, I was shooting a shotgun. I don't remember it going off. I don't remember hearing it go off, but I know it did. I remember hearing the shots of the other officers that were involved. So there's certain physiological things that happen when your body's under those levels
Do you
of
remember
stress.
smelling the gunpowder?
I didn't remember smelling it. But it's funny, things you remember, things you don't, things
Yeah,
that
yeah.
trigger the memories. Thankfully, I didn't have any long-term emotional, issues from my shooting. As far as I know, neither did any of the other folks involved. But I can tell you that I've seen other officers go through very difficult situations. My perspective is unique because not only was I a homicide investigator, then I was the IA investigator looking at it from the administrative side. I moved on and became a training sergeant and a firearms instructor and the firearms range master for my department. So I had to deal with the training aspects of these shootings and what came out of them. So we had a very controversial shooting back in 2011, literally 3 or 4 months before I took over in charge of the range, where there was 100+ rounds fired, an individual inside of a vehicle. The most concerning thing for me from that was that innocent people who were walking down the street were impacted by police bullets. So I knew I needed to solve that problem, if you will, and get our officers back in the fundamental mindset of be aware of your target and what lies beyond your target. Get them understanding that there needed to be much more responsibility in how they use their firearms to avoid anything like that ever happening again.
Which goes to show that just being an officer is not an easy job, and it's not meant for everyone, right? Much less a high liability incident where you're put in a situation where you're going to have to use force, deadly force. Right. So you go from being the involved officer in the shooting, so you understand that piece.
Right.
You go to being the investigator to trainer.
Right.
So you're carrying all three sides. Let's talk about this piece of training the officer and recognizing it's not just shootings that create traumatic situations, because there's all kinds of other traumatic situations and incidents that they're experiences that they have. Let's talk about what you're doing to continue this effort of helping the officers and providing better outcomes in training, in administration, and reflect on what's your experiences in the job to kind of give the audience a better perspective.
Miami Beach has been very proactive throughout the years at staying ahead of the curve on officer wellness, mental health awareness. Whereas many agencies for a long time just had like an employee assistance program that, they offered people that if they wanted to, they could voluntarily go to it. We probably 15 years ago started doing critical incident stress management debriefings and defusings of, even traumatic calls that you responded to. I remember as a young sergeant, having been promoted, came out of homicide, had been through critical incident stress management debriefing after handling the makeshift morgue for the Chalks Airlines crash in 2005.
Want to explain a little bit about Chalks Airline?
Yeah, we can talk
just
about
real quick so
it.
that people get an understanding of what that is.
In
or what that
2005, Chalks Airlines was basically a water airplane that took off from Watson Island about 6 days before Christmas. So everybody on board the aircraft was traveling for the holidays, and the aircraft had a structural failure and it crashed, and everybody on board died.
Yeah.
It happened as it was flying over Government Cut, and Miami Beach PD specifically my homicide team, myself and my partner at the time, who's still a sergeant with the organization, Ozzy Ramos, were tasked with setting up a makeshift morgue at the Miami Beach Coast Guard base and dealing with all of the various body parts and bodies that as a result of that. But from the wellness side of that, I went through, and so did Ozzy, and so did the rest of our team, and everybody that had a piece of it. The ocean rescue lifeguards, the firefighters that responded, everybody got together, and we had a big critical incident stress management debriefing. I realized that I needed that because in the wake of the investigation, I was very mechanical, very focused on getting through the things that I knew I needed to do to be able to perform my duties.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't really recognizing how it was impacting me from an emotional level. And the first sign for me that I needed to pay more attention was when one of my partners started adding names to the medical examiner reports, whereas we were just basically going through the different bags, body bags that were brought, and we were, labeling them John Doe this, John Doe that, Jane Doe number 11, whatever. When my partner was going back through those reports and adding names, I remember it bothered me. I got angry. And it was out of sorts for me that I knew, okay, I need to pay attention to this. So for me, that's how it was. My partner, on the other hand, he was very open, and he would cry, and not cry like randomly. During this critical incident stress management debriefing, everybody has a different perspective, a different reaction. He was always very able to let go of that emotion and have that release, whereas I was a little different. So that was very early on, 20 years ago now, where Miami Beach was focused on, hey, we need to do more for our first responders. And that's kind of evolved throughout the years. We were blessed to have a licensed clinical psychologist as part of our team. She was, and she was a police officer, came up through the ranks and became a psychologist later on. And she put together our peer support team. She put together our STEP program, which focuses on proactive, wellness, mindfulness, nutrition. It's taking care of the whole human being, as opposed to just focusing in on just the professional side of it.
And we often forget, a very good point. I want to stress the diet, man. We often think about, we're going to work out, or,
right,
we're going to recognize some of this, that we're in a high risk liability type environment, but we forget about our diets.
Yeah. And it's key. And we're in such situations, under stress, working late hours, working overnight hours, where there's not a lot of good options. You really have to be proactive in taking care of yourself and eating right, which I can honestly say I haven't done throughout my career. Now I've gotten better, and I've lost weight and gotten in better physical shape. But there was times in my career where my weight ballooned up because I just wasn't taking care of myself how I should have.
Yeah. So and you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you're taking care of yourself, because we need you around, right?
Yeah.
So your job isn't done, right?
No, still have work to do.
Yeah. So, but the agency, so through your experiences and experiences of other officers that's come up through the agency, this wellness mindset has evolved, right? So now you're able to address the stigma, right?
Yeah.
Go against the stigma, because that suck it up buttercup mentality that we used to have, lent to the stigma that, hey, I'm not broken, right? I don't need to go talk to anyone because
there's nothing wrong with me.
I can handle this.
And everybody was very protective of the fact that you don't want to be that guy with, a problem that prevents you from doing the job, because we get into the job because we love the job.
And if we admitted it, then there was something wrong with us.
Correct. And that's not the case. It's just, you're a human being dealing with a traumatic situation, and everybody processes that differently. It's being able to understand that, okay, there's help available, and these are the things that are in place. And by being proactive and taking care of your your physical well-being and exercising and your mindfulness, and we offered yoga and other things like that to help people in all kinds of different ways. You do all that proactive stuff before you get into that critical incident, it helps you that much more to be able to process and deal with that and move on, and be a healthy human being, because that's the key. It's not good for the organization, not good for the community, not good for any of our officers to have, stressed out, sleep deprived, tired cops on the street that are dealing with emotional trauma.
Yeah,
because they don't make good decisions.
100%. I think any agency head, any leader in any type of public sector environment, even successful corporations, right? If you don't recognize your staff's needs and you're not doing all possible to help them improve, then you're doing a disservice to the organization, you're doing a disservice to the company or the individuals you serve.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the change of mindset, the application of different strategies to recognize that your officers are going out on a day-to-day basis. How large is your agency right now?
So we're budgeted for 437. We've got, I think, 416 officers at the 416 right at the moment.
Okay, and you have your own dispatch?
We have our own dispatch that's part of the fire department.
Okay, so you have dispatchers, you have civilian staff that are tied to supporting the operations.
Yeah, all in, we have over 500, I think 550 employees.
So let's talk about, that's a sizable agency. So let's talk about, all these individuals, and each one of them is a different individual,
right,
with a whole bunch of different issues. Serving them and recognizing that, what may be traumatic to one may not be traumatic to the other, or may not be traumatic to the other, might be traumatic to this one, and so forth. How are you dealing with that? And how are you, monitoring, if you will, the flags?
So everybody's as an organization, we're very much in tune with getting to know people and building relationships, so that when you recognize that somebody's performing differently, they're reacting differently to things, you can be proactive and you can suggest someone from peer support reach out to them. So that's kind of the subtle way that we're constantly kind of monitoring one another, and we've created a culture where it's okay for somebody to say, hey, I notice this person's off, or you notice that a particular individual has an outburst or makes an inappropriate comment that is just very out of sorts for them, for their character. You can start to look at, okay, what's going on in their life? How can we help them so they don't put themselves in a position where they hurt their career, or they hurt their future, they hurt their livelihood because they're not processing either something that's happening in their personal life or something that's happening in their professional life, and it kind of bleeds into one another. So it's being proactive as an organization, creating a culture where it's okay for people to recognize and point out things like that without ramifications and hurting other people's careers. It's creating processes where it's okay to bring this to our attention, and we're going to get them peer support, and we're going to follow up with peer support. And the peer support team has been very good at if they recognize something that is a problem that they can't solve, then they're able to work with the organization and work with the individuals to get them the right kind of either additional treatment or assignment or something that's going to help them get through that process, so that they can, overcome whatever's challenging them and become 100% healed human being and go out on the street and be able to do their job and live their life.
So let me run something by you. Reflecting on my own personal experiences. So many years on the road, so many years of the hard knocks. You see things, you're not mainstream normal, right?
Yeah.
And, you encounter danger, so you face danger, so it's not as scary as it would be to somebody that doesn't, right? I'm trying to be diplomatic here. So you tend to do things in your personal life or in life, period, that are maybe at a higher risk than the average individual. Taking maybe a little more chances, you're maybe a little more aggressive on the road or in your personal life. I recognize you have to thread the needle as an administrator,
Mhm.
right? From accepted behavior versus non-accepted behavior. But do you see a change in law enforcement where that is being addressed, better addressed, the risky behavior, if you will? Because
Yes. The duty to intervene, and when you notice somebody that's caught up in the moment, that's doing something that they probably shouldn't do, that's going above what they're
Mhm.
legally entitled to do to respond to a threat, or to, our officers are quick to get involved and to prevent people from being put into those situations. Um, and we have all kinds of mechanisms in place, early warning systems, things like that. When we start to see behaviors, um, too many uses of force, too many complaints that are kind of red flags to the organization that this individual may be going through something that we need to pay attention to. But not from the institutional, organizational, bureaucratic perspective. We try to be proactive, and before we've triggered those things in the early warning system, if we have an individual that is having a relationship issue, is having a child care issue, is going through a bad divorce, and we start to see changes in their behavior, and how they interact with their colleagues. We've created a culture where it's okay for somebody from peer support to reach out to them. Hey, are you okay? What's going on? Is there anything we can help you with? Because we noticed that, a change in your behavior, and we want to make sure that you're okay. It's not done from the perspective of just protecting the organization. It's really done from the perspective of how can we help this human being who's one of our employees, who really is the most important resource we have in the police department,
Mhm.
people that work there. We invest thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours, in finding them, selecting them, training them, putting them in those positions. We have to be committed to investing that much and more to see them through their career so that they're successful human beings, they're making good decisions, and they live through this career and this profession to be happy, healthy human beings when they retire from this profession.
Very well said. So we've got a couple minutes left, and I want to get from you perspective of, or actually get your advice for anyone out there that's going through difficulties that maybe doesn't have a clear view on what they should do to address their issues.
To me, the biggest tragedy that we're seeing is, the suicide rate among vets and among officers. And it's something that isn't talked about enough. But we need to really provide that support, so that people understand that if you're going through a traumatic situation, if you're dealing with the aftermath of a critical incident, and it's taking you longer to get through it, and you're self-medicating, you're drinking, you're depressed, whatever it is that you're dealing with, we've seen it, and there's a way to get through it. There's a way to get help so that you can get back on track and get your life back to where it needs to be. The most important thing is ask for help.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Talk to somebody. You're not alone. Everybody's been through this either temporarily or struggled with it for years. Every officer in Miami-Dade County has the ability to attend struggle well training that's put on at the Miami-Dade PBA, through the Miami-Dade County Association of Chiefs. Retired Chief Renee Landa, is a big advocate for that program, and it works.
Yeah, and Struggle Well is extending beyond Florida. I believe they're in 21 states across the country. They're under Boulder Crest.
Right.
Look them up. I recommend them, but that's only one piece of the equation, right? Sadly, we've come to the end of the show. Another show of Bets and Badges. You can find us on all large podcast platforms under Bets and Badges, or on our website at betsandbadges.com, or Miami's Community News. I want to thank our producer behind the scenes, Tommy Stitt, the Millers, Michael Grant Miller, the Miami's Community News team, and more importantly, you, the audience. Drop us a line. Let us know what you want us to talk about. Let us know what your thoughts are. Look forward to speaking with you next time. Take care.